The isolation protocol, the Galactic Assembly Hall, drifted in the neutral zone between three ancient star systems, a testament to cooperation that had lasted 10,000 years. Inside its crystal dome, representatives from 83 civilized species gathered for what they called the Century Review. Every 100 standard years, they evaluated threats to galactic peace. This time, only one species dominated the agenda. Commander Elena Vasquez stood behind reinforced barriers in the observation deck, the only place humans were permitted during assembly proceedings. Her dark eyes tracked the movements of delegates below as they prepared to extend humanity's isolation for another century. Beside her, Dr. James Chen adjusted his neural translator, catching fragments of conversations in dozens of alien languages. They all said the same thing. Humans were too dangerous to integrate. 75 years had passed since first contact. 75 years since the mining incident near Proxima Centauri, where human colonists, mistaking a Zalathi survey team for raiders, had defended their claim with improvised weapons and mining charges. The Zalathi, a species that hadn't known violence in 3 millennia, had fled in terror. Their report to the Assembly had sealed humanity's fate before Earth even knew aliens existed. Ambassador Theron Vell of the Korthani Federation rose to address the Assembly. His translucent blue skin pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that conveyed emotion his words could not. The Korthani were considered the most advanced species in known space, their technology bordering on what humans would call magic. When they spoke, the galaxy listened. Distinguished delegates, Theron's voice resonated through the hall's acoustic fields. We gather once more to address the human question. In the past century, we have observed their expansion within their designated zone. They now inhabit 47 worlds, a rate of growth that exceeds any recorded species. Their population has tripled. Their military vessels, though primitive by our standards, number in the thousands. Elena clenched her jaw. Those military vessels were converted cargo ships and retrofitted mining platforms. Humanity had militarized out of fear, not aggression. But explaining that to beings who had evolved beyond conflict seemed impossible. The holographic center of the hall displayed images from human history. Wars, conflicts, weapons of increasingly terrible design. The Assembly murmured in what the translator interpreted as disgust and fear. They showed Hiroshima, Vietnam, Syria. They showed humans killing humans with chemicals, atomics, and engineered diseases. They didn't show the rebuilding. They didn't show the peace treaties, the international space cooperation that had finally united Earth. They didn't show humans rushing into burning buildings to save strangers. They are emotional, continued a representative, from the silence. A species that communicated through controlled gravitational waves. They make decisions based on chemical reactions in their primitive brains. They call it intuition, gut feeling, heart. This makes them unpredictable. Dr. Chen whispered to Elena. They fear us because we remind them of what they used to be. She nodded slightly. Every species in the Assembly had histories they'd rather forget. Violent pasts they'd evolved beyond through genetic manipulation, cybernetic enhancement, or philosophical enlightenment. Humans were still raw, still struggling with their nature. To the Assembly we were walking reminders of their own buried monsters. The vote was called. Extend humanity's quarantine for another century. Restrict trade to basic resources only. Maintain the technology embargo. Continue monitoring. The lights of agreement filled the hall like stars, overwhelming in their uniformity. Only 3 votes opposed, from younger species who still remembered what it was like to be judged. Elena turned to leave when every communication device in the hall screamed to life simultaneously. The lights dimmed as emergency protocols engaged. A distress signal, broad-spectrum maximum power, came from the outer rim. The pristine hall erupted in confusion as the signal resolved into video. The paradise world of Kepler 442b burned. The Marlow colony, home to 12 billion souls from 6 different peaceful species, was under attack. Ships unlike anything in the Assembly's database tore through the orbital defenses like tissue paper. They were organic or something close to it, writhing tentacles of dark matter, teeth made of collapsed stars, propulsion systems that violated known physics. A terrified Zalathi commander appeared on screen, his feathers molting from stress. The Devourers have returned. They consume everything. Our weapons pass through them. Our shields mean nothing. They eat energy itself. Please, anyone, help us. The transmission cut to static. For a moment, the great assembly hall was silent. Then panic. Delegates scrambled to contact their homeworlds. Defense fleets were recalled from patrol duties. Ancient defense pacts were invoked. The Corthani immediately began calculating evacuation probabilities. Theron Vel restored order with a harmonic pulse that resonated through every being present. The Devourers were legend. If they have truly returned, we must unite all civilized species to face them. All civilized species, Elena said loudly from the observation deck. Every head turned to the human section. That excludes us, doesn't it? The uncomfortable silence that followed spoke volumes. They needed every ship, every resource, every brilliant military mind to face this threat. But humans were dangerous, unpredictable, emotional. The very traits they feared might be what they needed. Over the next 48 hours, the situation deteriorated rapidly. The Devourers, whatever they were, consumed 3 more systems. Assembly fleets engaged them at the Battle of the Void Heart Nebula. It was a massacre. Energy weapons fed them. Kinetic weapons passed through them. The most advanced ships in the galaxy crumbled like paper in rain. The refugees brought horrifying details. The Devourers didn't just destroy. They absorbed consciousness, memories, the very essence of what made a being sentient. They grew stronger with each mind consumed, and they were heading toward the galactic core, where the oldest and most populated worlds resided. Elena received an encrypted message from Earth's Defense Council. Humanity had been monitoring the situation. Every human colony was mobilizing. The question wasn't whether to help, but how to convince the assembly to let them. Dr. Chen pulled up human military history on his personal display. You know what's ironic? Every tactic they fear from us might be exactly what works against these things. Asymmetric warfare, guerrilla tactics, the willingness to sacrifice for the greater good. The assembly reconvened in emergency session. The projections were dire. At current rate of advancement, the Devourers would reach the core worlds in 6 months. The combined assembly fleets might slow them by 2 months at most. Evacuation was impossible for populations that large. Theron Vel stood again, his bioluminescence dim with despair. We face extinction. Our peaceful ways, our advanced technology, our evolved consciousness, none of it matters against an enemy that consumes existence itself. Elena activated her communication override, a privilege granted to all observer species but never used. Her voice filled the hall. Ambassador Vel is correct. Your peaceful ways won't stop them, but ours might. The hall erupted in protest, but she continued. You fear us because we're violent, emotional, unpredictable. Because we'll sacrifice ourselves for strangers. Because we'll turn mining equipment into weapons and fight with rocks if we have to. You fear us because when pushed, humans don't just fight to win. We fight to make sure our enemies never threaten anyone again. She paused, letting her words sink in. You've spent 75 years keeping us in a cage because you're afraid of our darkness. Now that darkness might be the only thing standing between the galaxy and complete annihilation. So I ask you, what do you fear more? Humans or extinction? The debate raged for hours. Some argued that bringing humans into the conflict would be trading one threat for another. Others pointed out that they were already facing extinction. What did they have to lose? Finally, a small voice spoke from the section reserved for the youngest species. The newborn, as they called themselves, had achieved spaceflight only 2 centuries ago. The humans have monitored our distress. They have ships ready. They're asking to help despite how we've treated them, perhaps that says more about them than their violent history. The vote was called again. This time the question was different. Allow humanity to join the defense of the galaxy. The lights were fewer this time, dimmer, but they were enough. By a narrow margin, the quarantine was lifted. Elena immediately sent the message to Earth. 2 words that would change everything. We're authorized. Within hours, something unprecedented happened. Human ships, ugly things built for function over form, began jumping into assembly space. Not dozens or hundreds, but thousands. Converted mining ships armed with nuclear warheads. Racing vessels with engines that shouldn't exist, built by humans who were told it was impossible. Colony ships welded with armor plating and bristling with projectile weapons. But most surprising were the volunteers. 30 million humans had signed up within the first day, knowing it was likely a one-way trip. The assembly couldn't understand it. Why would so many volunteer to die for species that had rejected them? Elena tried to explain to Theron Vel as they watched the human fleet gather. You see sacrifice as loss. We see it as defiance. Every human grows up knowing that sometimes the monster under the bed is real. And when it is, you don't hide under the covers. You grab whatever weapon you can find and you fight. Not because you'll win, but because that's what you do when someone needs help. The human fleet was chaotic compared to the ordered formations of the assembly. Ships of different sizes, different designs, some barely holding together. But they all had one thing in common. They were moving toward the threat, not away from it. Hen Monsters Save Angels Admiral Sarah Martinez stood on the bridge of humanity's flagship, the ESS Defiance. It wasn't the prettiest ship in the fleet. It had started life as a colony vessel, been converted to a mining platform, then retrofitted as a warship when the quarantine began. But it was tough, practical, and carried something no assembly ship did, a crew willing to do the unthinkable. Around her, the human fleet gathered at the designated coordinates. The assembly had given them the outer edge of the defense line, expecting them to be cannon fodder while the real fleets did the work. They didn't understand that humans worked best when underestimated. Admiral, her tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Yuki Tanaka, called out, "Assembly Fleet Command is requesting our battle plan." Sarah smiled grimly. "Tell them we're still working on it." In truth, she had 17 different plans, each more insane than the last. But they all centered on one crucial observation from the battle footage. The Devourers consumed energy, but they seemed to have trouble with simple matter. Kinetic weapons passed through them, yes, but they had to actively phase to allow it. It took them effort. Dr. Marcus Webb, the lead scientist assigned to the fleet, floated over in the zero-G bridge. "Admiral, I've been analyzing the Devourers' consumption pattern. They're not just eating energy. They're converting matter to energy, then consuming it. But the conversion takes time, processing power." "How much time?" "At their current rate, about 0.3 seconds per kilogram of dense matter." Sarah's eyes lit up. "So if we hit them with enough mass all at once?" "They'd have to choose. Phase through it and lose cohesion, or try to consume it and get overwhelmed." She opened a channel to the entire human fleet. "All vessels, this is Admiral Martinez. I know you all volunteered for this, knowing we might not come back. The Assembly thinks we're here as a distraction. Meat shields for their precious advanced fleets. They're about to learn why humanity survived everything the universe threw at us." She paused, looking at the tactical display showing the approaching Devourers. "We're going to do what humans do best. We're going to be absolutely certifiably insane. Operation Shotgun is a go." The plan was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. Every human ship would accelerate to maximum velocity directly at the Devourers. At the last second, they would eject everything. Cargo, equipment, furniture, waste. Even the bodies of volunteers who had already chosen to sacrifice themselves. Millions of tons of simple matter, traveling at significant fractions of light speed. But that was just the distraction. While the Devourers dealt with the massive cloud of debris, smaller human ships would perform something the Assembly considered impossible. They would manually pilot through the chaos, get close enough to the Devourers and detonate nuclear weapons inside their phase fields. The Assembly Fleet Command was horrified when they received the plan. Ambassador Theron Vell personally contacted Admiral Martinez. "This is madness. You'll lose half your fleet just in the approach." "Probably more," Sarah admitted. "But it'll work." "How can you be so certain?" "Because it's too stupid to fail. These things evolved or were designed to fight advanced civilizations. Energy weapons, exotic matter, controlled singularities. They're prepared for sophisticated attacks. No one prepares for someone to throw a kitchen sink at them at relativistic speeds." The first wave of Devourers appeared at the edge of the system. They were worse in person than the footage suggested. Writhing masses of something that hurt to look at directly, bending space around them, leaving trails of nothing where they passed. The Assembly Fleet opened fire with their best weapons. Beams of contained antimatter, gravity pulse cannons, even an attempt at a controlled black hole. The Devourers ate it all and grew larger. Then the human fleet moved, not in formation, not with any grace, but with purpose. Engines pushed beyond safe limits screamed in protest. Ships began breaking apart from the acceleration, but they kept going. The crew aboard those failing vessels manually held systems together, buying seconds, minutes. "Distance to target 30,000 kilometers, Tanaka reported, beginning Operation Shotgun." Across the human fleet, cargo bays opened. Everything poured out. Mining equipment, processed ore, water reserves, food supplies, personal belongings. One ship, the Crazy Ivan, even ejected its entire outer hull. The crew inside wearing pressure suits and still manning their stations. The cloud of debris, traveling at 20% the speed of light, hit the Devourers like a tsunami of matter. For the first time since they appeared, the entities paused. They tried to phase, but there was too much. They tried to consume, but it would take minutes, maybe hours, to process that much simple matter. Now, Sarah commanded. The suicide runners, volunteers who knew they wouldn't return, pushed through the debris field. Small, fast ships with minimal shielding and maximum thrust. They danced between chunks of metal and ice, using the chaos as cover. The Devourers, still processing the massive influx of matter, didn't notice them until it was too late. The first nuclear detonation inside a Devourer's phase field produced something no one expected. The entity screamed, not with sound, but with gravity waves that rippled through space-time. It thrashed, trying to expel the explosion. But nuclear fire doesn't care about exotic matter. It burns until there's nothing left to burn. One Devourer fell, then 3, then a dozen. The human fleet pressed the attack, firing mass drivers loaded with the densest materials they could find. Some ships even loaded their weapons with radioactive waste, turning their greatest environmental failure into ammunition. But the cost was terrible. The ESS Courage, commanded by Captain Alex Robinson, lost all thrust and drifted into a Devourer's feeding tendril. Instead of trying to escape, Robinson overloaded his reactor and detonated inside the creature. The ESS Hope followed suit, then the Resilience, the Endurance, the Never Surrender. Each ship that fell took Devourers with them. The entities began to adapt, trying to avoid the human fleet. But humans did something else the Assembly couldn't understand. They pursued. Damaged ships that should have retreated instead accelerated harder. Crews that should have evacuated stayed at their posts. Dr. Chen, monitoring from the assembly hall, tried to explain to the horrified delegates. You don't understand human psychology. We're persistence predators. Our ancestors didn't kill prey by being stronger or faster. They killed by following, by never giving up, by being the thing that just keeps coming no matter how far you run. The battle raged for 18 hours. The assembly fleet provided support, but it was the humans' insane tactics that turned the tide. When the last Devourer tried to flee, it was a human ship, the ESS Last Stand, that caught it. The ship was barely functioning, held together by emergency force fields and determination. Its captain, Maria Santos, had lost half her crew and most of her weapons. She rammed the entity at full speed, detonating every remaining weapon as they merged. The explosion was visible from 3 systems away. When the dust settled, the impossible had happened. The Devourers were gone. But so was 60% of the human fleet. 20,000 ships, over 3 million volunteers gone. The debris field would become known as the Terran Memorial, a permanent reminder of humanity's sacrifice. The aftermath was profound. The Assembly couldn't reconcile what they had witnessed. Humans hadn't just fought. They had thrown themselves at death with what could only be described as enthusiasm. They had saved species that had imprisoned them, defended worlds that had rejected them. Ambassador Theron Vell met with Admiral Martinez aboard the damaged Defiance. His bioluminescence was shifting through patterns no human had seen before. The translator struggled, finally settling on a word: shame. We were wrong, he said simply. We saw your violence and feared it. We didn't understand that violence can be a choice, not just an instinct. You chose to use your darkness to defend the light. Sarah was exhausted, covered in burns from when her bridge had partially decompressed. We're not asking for your approval, Ambassador. We never were. We just wanted a chance to prove that humanity's greatest weakness, our emotional, irrational, violent nature, is also our greatest strength. What do you want now? Theron asked. Sarah looked out at the stars, at the debris field where so many humans had died. We want what we've always wanted. A place at the table, not as subordinates or quarantined threats, but as equals. We've shown you what we'll do for strangers who hate us. Imagine what we'd do for friends. The vote to full integrate humanity into the Galactic Assembly was unanimous, not out of fear this time, but out of respect. The species that had been deemed too dangerous, too emotional, too unpredictable, had proven that sometimes those were exactly the qualities needed. In the years that followed, human representatives sat in the assembly hall without barriers. Human ships patrolled trade routes not as threats but as protectors. The same aggression that had terrified the galaxy now stood guard over it. And in schools across 84 civilizations, children learned a new lesson. Sometimes monsters weren't something to fear. Sometimes monsters were what stood between you and the real darkness. Sometimes the scariest species in the room was exactly who you wanted on your side when the universe showed its teeth. The memorial to the human volunteers became a pilgrimage site. Millions visited to try to understand what could drive a species to sacrifice so much for those who had rejected them. The human tour guides always gave the same answer, a quote from an ancient Earth philosopher. "We are not nobler than the universe. We are not better than life. But we are life looking at itself, and we will rage against the dying of the light." The galaxy had learned something important. Humans weren't dangerous because they were violent. They were dangerous because they could choose when to be violent and for whom. And when humanity chose to fight for you, no force in the universe could make them stop. The quarantine was officially lifted on the 100th anniversary of first contact. But by then it didn't matter. Humanity had already broken free, not through force or demanding rights, but by doing what humans had always done. They had looked into the darkness, smiled, and jumped in to fight monsters for people they didn't even know. Because that's what humans do. They fight, they sacrifice, they protect, and sometimes, just sometimes, the universe needs exactly that kind of dangerous,